Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Tax incentives in residential and economic development tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Jennifer Oswald, President and CEO of the Downtown Memphis Commission, and Reed Dahlberger, President and CEO of the Economic Development Growth Engine, or EDGE. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Also, Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So we'll start focused on the whole question of residential pilots, residential tax incentives, and the roles of your various organizations. And we'll kind of go more broadly about tax incentives and pilots, which are always a bit of a controversy and a thing people want to know more about and why they're happening. And then other things going on with both your organizations. But why don't I start with you, Reed, in terms of residential pilots and this new program that's been rolled out. Where are we with residential pilots, and what does your organization do with them? Let's start there.
Sure. Well, actually, residential pilots have a long and extremely successful history in the country, in the county, in the city of Memphis, thanks to the Downtown Memphis Commission and their organizations. More recently, really last year, Mayor Strickland and Mayor Luttrell wanted to take really mirrors the success that DMC has had downtown and spread it throughout other parts of the core city. They wanted to be able to incentivize to assist residential projects that otherwise would not have happened. They, as well as many other people, are extremely cognizant of the fact that over a period of really decades, there had been virtually no new multifamily built outside the greater downtown area. And so they asked the EDGE organization to, in a sense, again, try to mirror what DMC was doing downtown. And so we created a pilot specifically for residential projects to try to close the gap between rents and costs that we see throughout the city.
And for those, and we've defined it before, but PILOT stands for?
Well, PILOT stands for Payment in Lieu of Tax, but it is a temporary partial abatement of the property taxes that an entity would otherwise have paid.
And so, and this is Eric math, but in simple terms, if a property is sitting there empty, and is paying $10, making up numbers, $10 a year in taxes. If it were built, the tax rate would say, okay, it's going to now pay $50 in taxes. Right. The pilot allows them to say pay something less than that $50, but more than the $10 it was at as it was a vacant piece of land.
That's right. So the property, it's the win-win situation. The property pays more in property tax, but you have provided enough of an incentive for that project to happen. And so you have, in some cases, jobs. In the case we're talking about, residential units the community otherwise wouldn't have had. At the same time, the city and county are getting more in property tax.
And we'll get into some of the concerns and skeptics of that. But just also so we just get the groundwork right. Sure. These residential ones, you've done how many?
We've only done 4. Okay,
and you plan to do how many?
The program is set up to do 10, and then we do a timeout and we reevaluate. Is it still needed? Is it working? Does it need to be tweaked? And so, again, it was set up as a trial program to see if it could work, if it would work, and if so, how to make it work well.
Wait, which are the 4 that have been done?
So we have done 2, essentially on Madison Avenue in the Midtown area last year. And then this year we did what's called Thrive at the Park, which is a proposed project right at Sam Cooper in East Parkway, and a project on Broad Avenue in Binghamton.
Okay, and we'll go back through all that, but just lay the line, so thank you. You all, the Downtown Memphis Commission, through your affiliated groups, have been doing pilots for longer. Give or take, how many have you all done, and why are those important, and what role have they played in downtown development?
So the whole point of an incentive program is to encourage investment in an area where you wouldn't normally attract the investment. So in our case, we've been prioritizing recently downtown core, which is Main Street Mall, as well as areas that have not seen as much investment. But we also do entertain applications throughout downtown because it's still difficult to make that cost to rent ratio work throughout all of downtown.
The cost being the cost of building.
The cost of building.
And the rent being the rent you get once you rent it out.
That's right, because often downtown, when we are encouraging density and want to have mixed use within our buildings, we often have to build structured parking within the entity, which rises the cost. And if you want to go taller on a building to get more density, then the cost goes up with that as well. And so It definitely does not work when you try to, if you play that out, it might be $3 a square foot, which we just won't be able to get.
And we'll go back through that. And again, some of the people, I know there are people out there listening who challenge some of those assumptions, but just lay of the land, about how many has the DMC done over the many years it's been around?
I mean, it's our entity, the Center City Revenue Finance Corporation, which is the same legal entity as EDGE, an industrial development board. And there have been many, I would, You
think it's 20 or you think it's 50?
No, it's closer, more than 50 even over all the years. I mean, it goes back 40 years. So.
Okay, let me get Bill involved.
Reed, let's talk a little bit about why there hasn't been any new multifamily over quite an amount of time. I think that there has been this perception maybe that multifamily and single family can't coexist, because we saw so many cases in the 60s and 70s where an apartment complex went up and homeowners were very alarmed about it, said, well, this is the end of this subdivision as we know it. Why are things different in that regard now?
Well, I think fast forward from the 60s to the 2010s, and what we see is that apartments, market rate apartments, are the option of choice for millennials and empty nesters who want to live in the urban core, who want to take advantage of all the great amenities that this city has to offer, and don't want the added burden of home ownership. And so I think there's been a real sea change in the way apartments are viewed. The Memphis 3.0 planning initiative, which is underway and which you all have talked about on multiple occasions, has identified that the city has an opportunity to stabilize and grow its population, but it needs housing of all sorts and all price ranges, so single family, multifamily, condos, every imaginable type. We need more renovation. But the study also points out the fact that apartments are going to be the biggest chunk of what we need to add to that. So in order to stabilize and grow the population, in order to provide housing both for the younger and the older of us who want to take advantage of the urban amenities and achieve the kind of density that Jennifer's talking about, we need apartments.
Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, you're not just talking about areas that we might associate with apartments, a midtown or those areas. This could also be suburban as well.
Suburban meaning?
Suburban meaning some of the suburban towns and cities.
Okay. Well, that would be up to those communities. Mm-hmm. They have always had the ability to do residential pilots, as Jennifer talks about. Center City Revenue Finance Corp, maybe going back 40 years. The law has allowed for this. So if all the suburban communities have industrial development boards like EDGE and the CCRFC, if they choose to do this, they can.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, let's talk a little bit about the mix that you're looking for downtown in residential and young professionals. How hard is it to achieve that balance of a rent that is going to allow someone just starting their first professional job to move downtown and yet pay the bills, pay the cost of building something new that's apartments?
It's extremely difficult, again, because the amenities that a lot of the people seeking to live downtown are looking for in order to be satisfied with all that's going on. Also, it's a constant battle, I think, for our city to maintain affordability as well as serve all the different needs of our residents. So we do have some people looking for a high-end apartment with high amenities, structured parking, all these things, but we also want to be sure that we build a downtown that's for everyone, and so that our prices remain, at least to some degree, some mix available for all, and so that adds to the difficulty in matching up that rent to the cost that it takes to build. Mm-hmm. Also, we strive to encourage mixed use buildings, so we want ground floor active retail. We don't even want a fully active building if it's outward facing. It's sort of dead to the the pedestrian walking by. So we do encourage retail on the ground floor, and that costs more money because you could put a few more apartments in that space and make a little bit more money.
Is that a formal condition in the pilots you do, that the income levels or the rates, the rent rates being mixed?
Sure, yes. So we do have a component where 20% of the units need to be available for people who make 80% of the median income. So there is a requirement for that.
So to the people who will say, yeah, but downtown has all this construction going on, You've done, tens of pilots, the DMC is over the year. When is the point at which those aren't necessary anymore?
Well, we scrutinize every application in detail. We look at, the math behind their pro forma. We look at what their lender's requiring, which often drives a lot of this, because it's not just about what kind of return can they get. It's about, can they even get financing to do the project? So that's a big piece of it. And we're constantly evaluating that process, but it has served us well for 40 years. Beyond that, we're trying to build a campus that serves our employees who are working downtown and our residents, both of which have grown significantly recently, but we're still not to a point where we have the density to attract a lot of the retail that we want. We need even more people. And some of our most effective places in our city to provide services from the city's perspective are the most dense, so a harbor town type area. So we're nowhere near that in downtown, and we still have lots of work to do. And so, again, we look at every application with high scrutiny individually, but as an overall whole, if you walk downtown, there's still some pretty big gaps that we need to fill.
Have any, have any apartment, multifamily projects been done in recent years? I guess I can really only ask since you've been in charge, maybe, but without a pilot.
So there have not been any apartments in recent years. There is a condo project that's coming online, but again, it's been extremely difficult for that to come to be. And we have seen some projects who never came into public. We worked with them and they couldn't quite get it to work. So there's always a lot of that. There's a lot of projects that never happened that just couldn't quite get there even with the incentive. So
similar questions for you, and as you go into this new program, this trial. I'm trying not to call it a pilot program because that's just going to be really confusing. This trial residential pilot program, based on the experience of other types of pilots that maybe people are more familiar with in terms of industrial and warehouse and offices and so on. How do you measure the return on investment? Again, we did that basic math where it's generating X, it has the potential to generate this theoretically, and the pilot says, okay, we're going to be somewhere in the middle on that. How do you know it's worth it in the end, that property wouldn't have been better off, and the city and the community would have been better off to hold out for somebody who paid full freight on the taxes?
Well, so a couple things. You can never actually answer the question if we waited longer. But having waited since, in some cases, the 1980s to see growth of apartments outside the downtown area, I think the argument was we've waited long enough, that we need to seize the moment. Memphis has an opportunity to grow, and the question is, are we going to be aggressive and go out and help make these things happen where possible, or are we going to sit back and again be passive? And the decision was made by the mayors and the EDGE board to be aggressive. At the end of the day, none of our crystal balls are perfect. But as we look at the math, and as Jennifer pointed out, so looking at pre-tax cash flow, looking at cash-on-cash return on investment, looking at the debt coverage ratio, looking at the break-even point, when you look at these projects and you analyze the numbers without assistance, they don't make sense. Some of them have negative return on equity without the assistance. Even with the pilot, the numbers really aren't outstanding. These are long-term build and hold plays. In other words, in the short term, they don't make sense.
To what extent, and you don't set the property tax rate for Shelby County or Memphis, I don't, just so everyone knows that I've established.
I know where this is going.
I've established that. Is the simpler answer from a public policy point of view simply to lower the overall tax rate?
Taxes are an issue. So we've only done 4 projects, and so it's a very small universe. But as we look at the 4 that we have done and we analyze them from a tax perspective, the tax rate is about 15% of the 15 to 19% of the rent payments going to pay taxes. So yes, in a market where rents are essentially too low given our construction and operating costs, anything we could do to lower the cost is going to spur development. Whether we're talking residential, office space, even industrial space, the people who put capital at risk, the developers, will tell you lower taxes would help.
To the critics who say wouldn't it matter, no matter what, these developers are always going to go for some sort of incentive. They're always going to go and say, well, okay, so let's say the tax rate was magically cut in half by the council and commission tomorrow. They would argue these developers are still going to ask for some kind of break, and your organization is still going to give it to them, and you shouldn't give them these incentives no matter what.
Well, they're 2 out of 3. Yeah. So they're right that people will ask if it's out there. Why wouldn't they? You would, we would. But I think what we're saying to you is they wouldn't get it. If the numbers didn't indicate a need, and we couldn't demonstrate this to you on a case-by-case basis, and when we present the project to our board, we present these numbers not only to the board but to the public and show what the analysis is. So yes, they would ask, no, they wouldn't get it, and yes, people are right. If an incentive isn't needed, it shouldn't be granted.
And need is that the rental units are needed, or the incentive is needed to make the numbers work?
The former, which is a policy decision, and the latter, which is really math.
Okay. All right, Bill, and 10 minutes left.
All right. Reed, at some point, will these residential pilots work with what I'll call traditional economic development that we see, like a new company moving here? Will we see a coordination of that you've got a company that wants to relocate here, build a plant or build a headquarters building, and then you get involved in housing around that?
I think you actually see something akin to that in the downtown area, and Jennifer talked about the campus, and I think that's where you'll see it. I think from our perspective, what we'll see is over the years, EDGE has evolved. We've identified the fact that we, as these industrial development boards, have certain legal authority. We can do certain things. We can do tax abatements and tax increment financing and loans and bonds, et cetera, and that those tools can have a broader impact on our community. So we have broadened the mission of EDGE to include more neighborhood revitalization. So as we look at retail and neighborhood strips and trying to revitalize some of our core neighborhoods in the city, residential pilots will clearly play a role. I think in terms of matching, say, an office project to a residential project, I think the downtown campus is where we're going to see that play out.
Mm-hmm. If I could add, I think St. Jude's a good example of that. So part of their growth plan, includes amenities for their employees, and that should grow. And throughout the rest of the medical district in our downtown, there's this effort to have capacity for people to live close to where they work or go to school. But we don't have the inventory right now. There's just not anything for them to take in. So we need to build more for that purpose. And I think we'll see other things like that.
Is industrial, it used to be that when you built industrial, you didn't even think about building residential anywhere near it. And before that, you did think about building residential near it. What is the state of that kind of an option?
If given their druthers, most industrial users would love to be and prefer to be in brand new industrial parks, far from residential, far from people who will complain about truck traffic or anything else. And therefore these projects, particularly the big box projects, are moving to the periphery of our community. And quite frankly, that sort of outward migration goes back a century. Everything used to originally be around downtown, and as that became less and less feasible, it moved out. So in terms of sort of big box activity, we anticipate that'll continue moving to the periphery. In terms of other kinds of manufacturing operations, which are now getting cleaner and smaller, and with 3D printing and other kinds of new technologies becoming things that can be done closer into the core and closer to where the talent is, I anticipate that we're going to see those kind of activities more closely integrated into the downtown, midtown, and some of our North Memphis, Whitehaven, closer in than we will see the big boxes.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned North Memphis. Is Firestone, the old Firestone site, is that a possibility for something like that? Or do you have people who look at that and say, we're interested in that, but we don't know about remediation and those kind of things?
Right. So the Firestone site's for sale. The Mid-South Junior Golf Association now has it listed, and we hope to see it back into productive use. It's a brownfield site. It has challenges.
What brownfield meaning?
I'm sorry, brownfield meaning former industrial site. It was formerly owned by Firestone. Now that's Bridgestone. It's been well investigated. It was well investigated back in the early 2000s.
For environmental issues? I mean, is that what we're talking about, chemicals and such in the ground?
Environmental issues, and also some of them are just engineering issues, construction issues. The slab is still on site, covering about 34 acres. There are some underground tunnels and so forth. So it's a combination of environmental and engineering issues. Bridgestone will be involved in any reuse of the site. They have a deed restriction. The Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation will be. But it is It's a large site, it's got a great location, and being able to bring some job-generating activity close to the neighborhoods on the north side of in North Memphis would be phenomenal. So we're very focused on Firestone.
It is interesting when you describe those things, which the tunnels and the concrete stuff, the difference, and you'll hear commercial real estate people, sometimes they'll say it on the show and on the record, but certainly off the record, that the difference of trying to sell an outside entity, which is often big private funds, New York, Atlanta, big city funds that don't really care about neighborhoods.
Right.
They don't really care about, they care about making money off their investment. So when you start talking about having to take all that, what did you say, 34 acres of concrete out and dealing with tunnels, in contrast to going out to a Marshall County in Mississippi or a Fayette County where there's just a clean piece of dirt that they can build on for much, much cheaper. Mm-hmm. That's the calculation that commercial real estate guys, mostly guys, women, will say gets lost in this debate. That the money doesn't want to deal with all those problems you identified. Is that fair? I mean,
it's absolutely fair. Brownfield sites are slower it takes more time to develop because you've got regulatory hoops to go through, you've got issues to deal with, and they're expensive. And just to put the cherry on the sundae, what we're really doing is spending a fair amount of time and a lot of money to create what in essence is an inexpensive asset, because industrial land is an inexpensive asset. All that said, it is a big site in the middle of a very important neighborhood, and it's a very appropriate use of time, energy, and resources for government entities, because if we don't step up, the private sector is not going to.
Right. Shift gears with about 5 minutes left, and staying with incentives and just development downtown, hotel development. To what degree are you all, your various organizations downtown, involved with hotels, and where do we stand in terms of the big potential convention center level hotels?
Sure. So our board is the same board, Center City Revenue Finance Corporation, that does the pilots, also deals with the hotels. And we have had an effort to try to raise the hotel stock to be larger hotels with more meeting space so that we can accommodate larger conventions, which will line up nicely with the convention center renovation that should be coming along in 2021. We recently did work out a deal, all of us together with Lowe's. Took a lot of effort from the city. With
That's 100 North Main.
That's right.
Gone dark and yeah.
It'll be a 500-plus hotel, and we received approval from the state to use that as a qualified use of the TDZ funds generated from the project itself, so sort of independent from the overall TDZ. And so that should be coming online. It has to open by 2022, so it'll line up nicely with the Convention Center Hotel, and it'll have a lot of meeting space.
One more for you. At the corner of 3rd and Union, across from the Redbird Stadium, is what used to be the Benchmark Hotel.
That's right.
It has been stripped down. It was under renovation. It is now, I think, fair to call it a blighted, empty concrete structure. What is going on with that site?
So,
and how many times a day do people call you about it?
Yes, definitely daily. And we actually had to take some legal action on that property, just declaring it a nuisance. And it has now changed hands, and it's in the hands of a really good group who's going to put a canopy hotel there, boutique hotel with ground floor activation again and meeting space. But really pleased to see that move forward. We expect that construction will be well underway this fall. They've already taken the old banners down, and they've been in there
Will they be
working.
tearing down those empty?
I think they're still determining, but it will be a mid-sized hotel, boutique hotel. That's we're really looking forward to.
2.5 minutes, Bill.
Just to go back to the Convention Center Hotel for a second, there has been some discussion that the actual hotel might be at 170 North Main, where the new police building is. What, if anything, can you say about that?
So actually that site was contemplated in the beginning. It's no longer in the running, but they are looking at some of the land surrounding, sort of in between that building and my office, the sort of the Civic Plaza. Mm-hmm. But they must also develop 100 North Main. So it will either be on that site, or 100 North Main will include a lot of amenities for the hotel, the parking garage, a lot of meeting space, potential other retail, and maybe even some residential or office as well.
Is the old police station under consideration, even though the last we heard of it, someone else was talking about it?
Someone else does own it,
okay.
And is looking at options for that. they've talked, but there's nothing formal of them working together at this point.
With a minute left, and we could probably do a whole show on this, although I'm sure, Reed, you would rather not. You were under a certain amount of criticism, your organization, that the EDGE should be, and some came from the chamber, Richard Smith from FedEx, who's the current chairman of the board of the chamber, was concerned that EDGE wasn't outselling the city. Now, I'm doing a poor job of relaying his position, so he wrote about it and people can see that. I'll frame the question this way. Should EDGE be actively selling the city? Is EDGE actively selling the city and pursuing people to come in and invest and fill in some of these empty sites?
Okay. So in 2014, EDGE and the Greater Memphis Chamber executed a memorandum of understanding so that we sort of defined our respective roles. And we agreed that it makes sense for the chamber to be our marketing and sales arm. That's the way pretty much everyone does it in Tennessee, and it's really a reflection of our open records laws in Tennessee. It's tough for government entities to keep things quiet, and when you're wooing a company from outside, they don't want to read about it, no disrespect. So we all agreed that chamber would be the point of the spear. Jennifer's organization, my organization, we are involved. We meet with the prospects as they become interested. We try to help close the sale.
Okay. And I didn't give you enough time on that, but I appreciate that very much. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.